Hello, everyone. My name is Blake Funston. I am a co-chair of the French Heritage Society, a Young Patron Circle. I'm so pleased to introduce this first installment of this Innovation in Action virtual event series. Over the next few months, we'll hear from 6 dynamic chateau owners in France who have captured the COVID moment by creating multimedia content through YouTube, Instagram, and crowdfunding platforms to raise awareness and support for their restoration work. Their stories have provided inspiration and much-needed escapism to thousands of viewers worldwide. Today, we'll hear from Stephanie Jarvis, Chatelaine extraordinaire of the Château de Lalande, joining us from the heart of France in the Centre-Val de Loire region. Stephanie's YouTube channel, The Château Diaries, is helping to safeguard her historic property for future generations. And now I'll hand it over to Stephanie and our distinguished Executive Director of French Heritage Society, Jennifer Harlan.
Thank you, Blake.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us at French Heritage Society, which includes 10 chapters across the United States and 1 in Paris, I say special bonjour to our members who have joined us today and a warm bienvenue to those of you who are new to our programming. For those who may not be familiar, French Heritage Society's mission over the past 38 years is awarding preservation grants to culturally and historically significant French architecture, both in France and in the United States. To date, we have supported over 600 projects, and that includes raising close to $2.6 million following the tragic fire at Notre Dame, which was 2 years ago tomorrow. An equally important part of our mission is ensuring that the skills required to work on preservation projects are transferred to the next generation. Through our advanced student internship program, each year we select and send around 35 university students across the Atlantic for internships at esteemed institutions. Our members make our work both possible and fun, and we are so grateful for their support. Lastly, I would like to thank the FHS team for their work on this program. Natalie May very thoughtfully curated the series, and Ben Wells is making sure that we have a top-notch experience together. Please note that you are welcome to submit questions through the Q&A button along the bottom of your screen throughout the program, and I'll share them with Stephanie following the conversation. I thank Stephanie so much for being here with us today. And to set the tone for our conversation, we thought everyone might enjoy being transported to the Château de Lalande through this phenomenal video.
Hi, I'm Stephanie, and this is my home, the 16th century Château de Lalande. Lalande was owned for hundreds of years by a family of marquises who were at the heart of French royal life. One of them even had the honor of being sent by King Louis XV to greet Marie Antoinette on her arrival in France. But, far from being a stuffy museum, this chateau is a living home. I live here all the time, and I'm regularly joined by my mother, my family, my friends, and wonderful volunteers from all over the world who help me to lovingly restore this historic home. Welcome to Lalande, a chateau filled with life, love, and laughter.
I was laughing because at the point when I said my mother, there was a lag on my line and it showed Aloysius the sheep.
I'll let you and your mother sort that out.
You'd be in trouble.
So tell us, let's start from the beginning. How did you find Château Lalande and settle in central France?
Well, it had been my dream since I was just a little girl. I think like many little girls, you dream of being a princess and living in a castle. And I lived in a very ordinary house, a tiny bungalow. But from there, I went to live in a huge mansion because my parents were both nurses, psychiatric nurses, and they decided to start their own care home for people with Alzheimer's. But my father had a very strong belief that even when people are mentally ill, they still respond very well to their environment. You know, beauty can still help. And so he felt that being in a beautiful building would help people to cope with the situation. So he and my mother bought a place that hadn't been lived in for a long time. It had been used as a school. It had been institutionalized a while before. And when I was just 6 years old, I started to see them bringing that back to life. And that made me realize that I loved old buildings. I loved seeing them being restored, but also I love living in them with a lot of people. And that's what I wanted to look for then as an adult, a beautiful place that I could restore and live in with a lot of people. So of course, chateaus fall perfectly into that category.
Yeah, well, certainly.
Yeah, but it took a while. I just thought it would be in the distant future, that I kept telling my best friend from university that one day we would buy together, and I kept on at him. I think I wore him down from the very first meeting we ever had, to eventually we were each living in a 2-bedroom flat in London, and he was round for dinner one evening, and I said, do you realize if we sold our flats, which we were thinking of doing because we thought it would be nicer to live in a little terraced house together in London, I said, if we sold them, we could actually buy a chateau for the same price as the tiny places we're looking at in London. And to my great amazement, one day he said, let's go for it. I'll ask work tomorrow, and if they say I can work remotely, then we can make the move. And so immediately, the minute I heard that, I was going out to France regularly to view chateaus.
And how many did you see before you settled ultimately on Lalande?
I think it must have been at least 10. I don't remember the number exactly, but each time I had to fly to a different part of France because I didn't have any set criteria in terms of where I would live. I knew it was more about the building and about having a connection with the building that you sometimes feel when you walk into the right place, you just know it. And in our price range, we didn't have that much choice. So I really had to look absolutely everywhere and be quite open-minded. We put an offer in on another place first that would have been far more manageable, I think 7 bedrooms and 3 acres. And then at the last minute found out there was going to be a motorway 400 meters from it. Yeah, so pulled out just in time, and I was a little disheartened, obviously. You can imagine when you've decided on a place, but it was all for the best, because one day I drove down the drive with my parents and saw Lalande, and before we even set foot inside, I said to my father, this is it. This is the one.
A coup de coeur, as they say.
Yes.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about Lalande. What's the history? What's the story of this particular chateau? Because they all have stories, right? They're all moments over time.
Absolutely. Every chateau in France has a story. It's amazing. Well, this chateau it's a very old chateau. It dates from the 16th century, but that's the part that we have now. We know that, in fact, there would have been at least a sort of manor house. It could well have been a chateau in the 12th century here, because we have the tax documents. It's amazing what survives through time, isn't it? We have the tax documents of the Lord who lived here in the 12th century. And what was extraordinary is when we found those, he listed all of the farms around. They were all his tenant farmers, serfs in those days. And it was all the same names, the same surname as the people living there today. And in fact, when we moved in, they said, you know, the family of marquis that you bought from, they've been here 200 years. They're newcomers around here. We're the ones that have been here all this time. When I found that document, they were absolutely right. Yeah. The rest of us come and go. After that, it was owned by a lot of rather strong women, interestingly, one of which was the cousin of Louis XIV, La Grande Mademoiselle. She was actually the richest heiress in France, so I'm sure did not at any point live in this chateau. She would have had many, many estates, and she got it because somebody hadn't paid the right duties, and therefore she got this chateau. And the woman that she got it from spent something like 20 years in battle to get it back, and did get it back. And eventually it went to the de Nadillac family, who are the ones that really were very involved in court life. They're a very ancient family. They have another chateau that they've had for 600 years. But for the last 200, since the French Revolution, since the restoration of the monarchy, they've been living here. They had to flee the country at the revolution because they were then the Marquis was the head of the King's Guard, and he went with his son to England. They fought against the French, against Napoleon, and with the restoration of the monarchy, his son came back to France, married the heiress of this chateau, which had been saved during the revolution because presumably her father had said to the revolutionaries, please come in, help yourself to anything you like, here's food and drink, let's chat about this, what a great cause, please just don't burn the chateau, take whatever you want. And he saved Lalande.
It's a beautiful story, but you've also saved it, because when you bought the chateau, it wasn't quite in the shape it is now. What was the status of the work that was happening at the time, and what have you had to look into yourself?
Well, I have to hand it to the previous owners because they loved this chateau very, very much. And they had done everything they could to keep the fabric strong. So extremely lucky. We have an excellent roof. Structurally, it's very sound. We find problems every now and then. That's natural in an old house. But inside it needed all of the plumbing, all of the electrics, septic tanks. No one ever truly got to the bottom of where that was before. And in fact, in trying to do the best that they could against the damp in the 1970s, they had put asbestos cladding on every single exterior wall of the ground floor. So you can imagine the job that it was to have a special convoy taking that away to be properly destroyed. So there were a lot of things to do. And for about 5 years, we were just in constant works here.
How much of that, were there a lot of surprises that were a part of that in the first 5 years, or were there things that you suspected?
Most of which we suspected. We could see that the structure was in a good state. So we didn't even have a very full survey done because we thought to ourselves, there will be so much unexpected that we have to spend money on, that we may as well not spend the money on the survey. We know the roof is good, and we really in a chateau, if you know the roof is good, and we knew about the asbestos. So with those two things, the rest you can just get to bit by bit. But we have over 100 windows, for example, almost all of which need replacing. 16 years later, I think we've replaced about 5. But you know, it will be a long process.
Right. And how was the restoration work funded before your multimedia presence evolved?
Well, I was extremely optimistic and thought that it would be a lot cheaper than it was and a lot faster. But I'm happy that I was optimistic, because I think if I'd known the truth, I would have been too scared to buy. So sometimes looking before you look can have good results. I don't necessarily recommend it to others, but when we bought, my parents sold their house and moved into a tiny 1-bedroom house. So they forgot that they had a daughter. Finally persuaded them to put a mezzanine bedroom in. And they decided to do a lifetime inheritance for me, which in England is when you give somebody their inheritance whilst you're still alive. And so they were incredibly kind. They did that, and I spent half of that on a small flat in London, which I rented out, and that helped just keep the maintenance costs. In fact, that is the only thing that kept me going all of these years. And the other half was spent on doing the works that I mentioned, all of the plumbing, all of the electrics, all of the heating. They were the big things, and the septic tanks. And then, of course, I ran out. So I wasn't too sure exactly what to do next. Nick, my co-owner, who's my best friend from university, he was just amazing. I mean, he's basically been bailing this place out whenever he could all of these years. And then, of course, I started the bed and breakfast, which is what a lot of chateau owners do, because that's the sort of accepted way of trying to bring in funds to these places. But we're very isolated here. It's not the touristy region, and it was a very slow start. But that improved when I was on television in England. And after that, the bed and breakfast did very, very, very well. And in fact, the first year that we were going to break even on the chateau for the running costs with the bed and breakfast was last year. And then COVID struck. So we really get there for a moment.
And when did you start documenting your progress on video, and how did that evolve into the successful social media presence that you have now?
Well, I mentioned there just briefly that we were on television in England. That was 5 years ago that we first appeared.
Yeah.
Out of the blue, we have a lot of volunteers coming here. We used to be on a site called Workaway, and I once got a website from somebody saying, "Hi, I'm not actually a volunteer. I work for a production company in England, and we're looking for British chateau owners in France to star in a show about restoring French chateaus." So I was curious, and I got back to them thinking it would be a tiny little show on an obscure channel, and it turned into the biggest daytime TV launch in several years in England. So that was incredible. Being on that show made a huge difference, because I'd gone through a period of being really quite alone here, because Nick had to go back to England for work. He wasn't able to stay, that's my friend. And my father sadly died in 2009. And my mother, very happily, a few years later, met Percy, who is now my stepfather. It seems so weird calling him that. Anyway, he's the most wonderful man. He's absolutely lovely. But he lives in South Africa. So my mother was then half of the year in South Africa. I'd lost my father, whom I was incredibly close to, and who was a very strong presence here, because he was like me in terms of optimism, and like me, he saw everything finished in his mind's eye. So he never minded about the interim process. And Nick and my mother are both more realists. So I was the only optimist saying, "Oh, this is a great idea, great idea." And so I was quite literally alone at times at the chateau, which is a little daunting when you get to it. But suddenly I was on television, and people I'd never met were contacting, asking about chateau life, asking everything about the history of the place, and showing the same enthusiasm that I felt for it, and the same love and passion for it. And not only that, but I was meeting the other owners from other chateaus on the same show, and that was eye-opening, because we had all the same problems. Down to, oh, do you get a room that just has flies that appear from the wall in their thousands at 1 week of the year and then disappear? I'm like, yes, we all get, what is that? So things that made you realize that you weren't alone in what you were going through.
I would imagine that's very comforting when you're undertaking something of that scale.
And after being alone for so long, it really was incredibly comforting. So I decided that I didn't know there would ever be a second season of the show, but I wanted to keep that magic, that connection with this community of chateau lovers. And so I decided to really be on my Instagram more and more. But I felt, the Instagram went really well, but I felt that it didn't really reflect chateau life, because an image is curated to be absolutely perfect. Because honestly, if there's mess or something in an image, that's all the person will see. So it really does have to be just right. But chateau life isn't like that. I mean, behind me, it all looks fairly tidy, but if I swizzle the camera around, tidy over there, there's always work going on. There's always building work. There's a wall that's just been taken down in this room, and the floor levels are different, for example. Instagram wasn't capturing the truth. And so I started instead making IGTV videos. And that I found my medium somehow. I really loved it. I was quite addicted to making these little glimpses into daily life here. And they did really well. Bit by bit, my audience was growing. And by the end of 2019, I had 10,000 subscribers. I'd moved on to YouTube by that point, but that was nothing compared to what was about to happen in the first lockdown.
It's very impressive. And I think, you know, you mentioned that you see the finished product, which I think is a real skill, and it's an important one when you're undertaking the type of work that you are. I know we have some pictures, a slideshow that shows some of the before and after restoration work. I wonder if now would be a good time to show that.
Sure. So here you see the chateau. So yes, there's the little chapel, and later I will show you a couple of shots of the interior. But basically, it looks very white, pristine on the outside, but inside it's a 19th century jewel box. So the chapel was built in 1866. It was consecrated by the Archbishop of Bourges, and that's going to be our next big renovation project at Lalande. The restorer should be arriving next month, fingers crossed. If we look at the next slide, this is the old wing, the original wing. And as I say, I think that the chateau was older even than this wing, but this is what we have that remains. And this was probably late 15th or early 16th century, an architect thought around 1490 probably. And there you can see the defenses. It's still got the machicolations, and inside those machicolations you have the defensive walls still, and then an inner defensive wall so that attackers could be there firing out, but the gunpowder that was stored in the middle of that space behind them would be safe from any incoming trajectories. So it's wonderful to be in a house so old that we remember these vestiges of what would have been just after the 100 Years' War between Britain and France. And then on the next, here we see the 19th century part that was built on. It was originally all 16th century, but there was a fire in the 19th century, and so they had to do big repairs. So in the central part with the large tower, the outside walls are still, many of them, original, and the internal walls, for example, I'm sitting in that area now, and the internal walls are nearly 1 meter thick, so they're not 19th century walls, but it was remodeled then. And then in the next, now this was a very sad story. We lost the lake at Lalande because of an EU directive, and the water police asked me to drain the lake a few years ago. But now seems that we shouldn't have drained the lake because it's so old, it's on maps from several hundred years ago, and therefore we should be allowed to keep it. So this is also a huge renovation that is about to start, and that's getting the lake back, which I'm very excited about because it's very strange to just have a large wetland. The wetland in itself is nice, but we lose that historical part of the chateau, which is such a shame.
Right.
Then the next slide. Well, there we go. That's it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh.
So there we've got a little boat house. I can't go onto a boat at all. You see, just wonderful thing, maroon boathouse. So the next one is the interior of the chapel. That's a fresco above the door. And I believe that this fresco is the death of Saint Joseph, because our chapel is the chapel of Saint Joseph. And these are the walls. So every wall in the chapel is like this. The whole thing Beautiful. Is absolutely covered in these frescoes. And so This is going to be a very, very large renovation project. Yeah. But I think that and the lake, they're the two most important ones to do here, which there's no way that I could have tackled those at the beginning. But now finally we're able to get to things like this, which is wonderful. But I think the next ones are just showing you what we have been doing so far. This was the Grand Salon. This is the Grand Salon when we were putting in underfloor heating and taking down a lot of internal walls that had been added in the 19th century, probably to be able to heat the rooms by making them much smaller. So we put back the Enfilade as it would have been in the past. And the next photo is the Grand Salon now. So better, but it's actually still got a long way to go. And at the end of the slideshow, I will tell you a little secret about that, because something exciting is going to be happening there soon. And the next photo, I can't quite remember which one it was. So this is the Enfilade. I said that we wanted to put back the Enfilade. I'm sure most of you know that in French chateaus, each reception room led to the next. There were no corridors. In the 19th century, they'd added corridors, which stopped the light from flowing straight through. In the room I'm sitting in now, for example, there's a window there, there's a window right in front of me, because the chateau looks huge, but it's only one room deep. So by removing the corridors, we got light from both sides in all of the reception rooms downstairs. And the next picture shows the Enfilade now. So little beautiful. Yeah, and when they were in those states before, my mother was in such a state. She just couldn't bear it. But my father and I were loving every minute. And the next photo. Oh yes, close up of a mushroom. This is the dry rot. dry rot that we had in what was then the billiard room, meaning that we had to rip out all of the paneling, all of the flooring. This is why downstairs we have terracotta flooring, which has all been reclaimed both from our own attics and from all over France, and it's all antique terracotta flooring. But this is why, because we just had to start from scratch, otherwise we would have lost all of the wood in the chateau if we let it carry on. And the next photo is that billiard room, which we now use as a winter salon. So you can see here that we did what we could with the decoration. The walls are just painted. It's no paneling has gone back yet, but with the funds that we had, we made it as livable and nice and healthy for the building as possible. And this was the dining room, and the dining room now looks like the next photo. Yeah, it was 3 little rooms before the dining room. Sorry about the mess in the dining room in that photo. I was actually doing some of the sewing because I did all of the curtains in the chateau. That took a couple of years of constant sewing.
It's gorgeous.
And I'm not sure, thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, so the dining room is really, I think it's a lovely room. It's very small. It's a little jewel box. And the next photo is the kitchen. Yes, here we've got a couple of before shots of the kitchen. We might even have 3 before shots of the kitchen, because I know that some of my patrons are here with us this evening watching, and they see the kitchen all the time because I'm always filming in there. It's the heart of the home. That's us living in there. There's my father in front of the window. My mother just coming in from the arrière-cuisine in the back of my head, I think. And the next one is the kitchen now. Yeah, a little better. So it's nice and light, but even there, the piece of furniture that has the sink in it just next to the window, we found that in an outbuilding, and we just fitted an old sink into it. The kitchen table was already here. The chairs were my parents' chairs from their British home. The light is from IKEA, and the top of the dresser we found in the attic and just added some shelves. So everything we did with what we could. And as you'll see, there's still no coving, for example, that still got to go in. But we're lucky because that whole area had its original flagstone floors. So the bones of the building are very good.
Yeah.
And this was the bedrooms. This is a rare sighting of my co-owner, the elusive Nick, because he's not usually seen in my videos. This is when we were first visiting the place, actually, and just wandering around. In fact, I think it was the day we signed to buy it, which was the first day that Nick had ever seen it. Because he was so busy at work, he couldn't come and view it. And I'd shown him photos. I told him, this is the place, I'm sure of it. And he was so lovely that he flew to France and signed on a chateau that he had never seen until then. He's probably just still a bit overwhelmed at that point. And then the next photo shows me in that room making all of the curtains. So we had huge curtain drops upstairs, and I found a tiny bit of matching fabric to the wallpaper, only enough to make the swags and the tails, and that's what I'm affixing there. And then I got some yellow fabric to finish the room, which you'll see in the next shot. So with everything, we were using what we had, and then just adding whatever was missing to try to save as much money as possible. I think the next photo, yes, this is the Chambre de Roger. Now, Chambre de Roger does not sound like a very elegant name for a French chateau, but that's because Roger was the valet of the mother of the Marquis who sold the chateau to me. No, sorry, his grandmother's valet. And this is the room closest to her bedroom. And so this is where Roger lived for years and years and years. The Marquis remembered him. He must have been a very good valet indeed, because apparently on her death, his grandmother actually left him a little flat in Paris. So yeah, in the 16e arrondissement as well.
He must have been very good at his job.
So this, in the next photo, you'll see what we did to his bedroom. So the Chambre de Roger, very feminine now, a little princess room, because it's a tiny room. So I chose a very small, it's an 18th century French lit à la polonaise, and I made all of the curtains for it. And yes, that's the Chambre de Roger now. The next room is the Chambre de la Tour, which is the very first room I ever slept in when I came to the Château de Lalande. because before I bought, another family had made an offer at exactly the same time, well, just later, the same day. And the Marquis was very kind because he hadn't signed for our offer yet. So he didn't need to sell to us. But he wanted to sell to a French family. It was so honorable that because we'd signed first, he said, I would like to change your mind because you're not married to Nick, you're friends. And I would have loved a family to live here. And I think that your dream, and you're only 29, you're not sure of the reality of it. So please come and stay. So my mother and I went to stay. I stayed in that bed and I loved it just as much the next morning, and begged him to still sell it to me. And thank goodness he did, because I've been so happy here. And he came back many times. Very sadly, he died last year. He was the most wonderful man. He celebrated his 50th wedding anniversary here with his wife. So we just kept seeing each other, staying in contact. And he said in the end, he was very happy that he'd sold to us. It had worked out.
But that beautiful connection is just, that's also what makes up the history of these chateaus and of these properties, right? That owner it was part of him, and he was so attached to it. It's beautiful.
And that's why I kept all of the names that they used. That's why Roger's bedroom will be Roger's bedroom for as long as I am here. I'm keeping that sense of history. And so this is how we decorated the Chambre de la Tour, because it was a little drab, a bit sad, but it had this beautiful original wallpaper. And so by adding this actually trompe-l'oeil paneling in this case, done by brilliant Michael Petherick of Doing It Ourselves. He's so talented. And he did all of that. And I made the curtains, the bed curtains, and we painted the bed. So it made a huge difference, I think. Yeah,
for sure.
And I'm not sure what the next picture is. Oh, there's Lalande from a field. Lalande from a field. And yes, what is the next one? Now this is this is something I've just revealed to my patrons today, so I can finally talk about this, is that I have literally, it just arrived last week, purchased this original 18th century paneling for the Grand Salon at the Château, which is such a dream come true. I can't describe it, because in Patreon you have various targets, target amounts, and you can set goals. And so I had at the very beginning set a goal that if we ever reached the $30,000 target, we would source 18th century paneling. And we hit the $28,000 target today. And I realized that it's coming soon, and it's not easy to find 18th century paneling. I'd been looking for months and months. And suddenly this was being sold from an hôtel particulier on the Ile Saint-Louis in Paris. And I just jumped at the opportunity. And this will be installed later this year in the Grand Salon.
Congratulations.
I think the next picture, it's the same. Yes, it's the same paneling. So finally, all of the paneling here had been lost in the fire in the 19th century. So finally, Lalande is blossoming and becoming what it would have been in the past, and going through another renaissance because of my patrons. So a huge thank you to them.
Congratulations. There's a lot of enthusiastic responses that are coming in on the chat line about that. Woohoo, it looks fantastic. It looks amazing. And someone else commented on how brilliant your inventiveness is in using what was already there. So I think people are really enjoying that snapshot of the work that's been done. I'll also share this other comment because I do think that this is something that makes what you're doing very special as well. And it said that the intro is what's helped thousands get through various lockdowns. So I think that the way that you're telling your story and the way that you're sharing your experiences it's just really even transcending the work that you're doing. It's bringing all of us there.
I think it's this community side of living here that really help people through. Renovation is nice to look at, and it's very uplifting to see before and after. I think that lifts everyone. But I think the real reason that people have been watching is seeing a group of people living together, especially in a lockdown when many people have been totally isolated in their flat, and seeing us in the countryside, which means that you don't feel the sense of lockdown in the same way. And people have been able to find escapism with us, which is really wonderful.
Yeah, I think so too. And how do you, because doing any one of these things is an extraordinary amount of work, but how do you balance being a full-time content creator with also overseeing this restoration project?
It's been very hard to find the balance. At first, I didn't have so much to do on the renovation front because I didn't have the funds. And so I could really be focused constantly on the content creation. But then when the content creation took off and I'm up to 5 half-an-hour videos per week, at the same time, obviously, the renovation picks up because there are the funds for it. And I find myself in 2 full-time jobs. And the way that I've found to deal with that is by filming one of them for the other. So I can talking about what needs doing, and if I film it, that then gives me content for the other job, and so the two go well together, actually.
Yeah, I can see that. You can wear both hats at the same time, so to speak.
Yeah.
And how do you think this funding model will affect others' preservation efforts? I know you've found a real community.
I found a huge community. What happens is I stumbled actually across this funding method. It wasn't a plan. I had very, very loyal subscribers. So not that many, but they watched every video and they were very engaged. And yeah, I'd get lovely comments. And a few people, just a few, it was like 3 or 4, had said, have you heard of Patreon? Because we would love to send a little something every month to help with the restoration of the chapel, I think most specifically at the beginning. And I haven't heard of it, honestly. So I looked it up. I think we know it less in Europe. I think it's much more known in America. And I thought, well, I'll do it. Thinking, imagine if I could get another 100 or 200 a month. That really make a big difference. In those days, that was a big difference. So I started it in February 2019, and but the response was beyond anything that I could have imagined. By the end of the following month, by the end of March 2019, I was receiving over $2,000 a month. And as I say, we've just hit $28,000 a month today. That's just 1 year later. And I couldn't have foreseen that at all. And then, of course, meanwhile, the YouTube ad revenue has gone up because we've now got nearly 130,000 subscribers. So that grew a lot during lockdown. And I find that now we've been able to make the Patreon account a non-profit only for the renovation, restoration, new life of Lalande, which means that I am legally obligated only to spend the money on the chateau, on the renovation of the chateau. And that means that my YouTube ad revenue is used to pay the people who are involved with the bed and breakfast here, or the managing of the chateau, all of our food, all of our monthly running costs, that comes from that pot. So the 2 pots are very, very separate.
Yeah, operations and restoration, really.
Yes. And
you can't have one without the other.
No, you can't. The two go together. So I have a company, very strangely registered company called Content Creation and Bed and Breakfast. So I think that was the first registering as that in the local area. But that is what's enabled us to move forward. And it made me think a lot about how stately homes were funded in the past. I know much more about the British model here, but we lost so many stately homes in England in the 1950s, post 2 world wars, because the land rents were simply not enough to support the houses. They would always been supported by agricultural rents before. And when that wasn't possible, especially with the new taxes in those countries, in England after the war, they just couldn't keep going, and a lot were destroyed. And those that weren't destroyed survived because they switched to a new funding method that was extremely shocking at the time. They decided to share their homes with the public. I mean, it was really shocking. We cannot imagine now how shocking that was. And we have the Marquess of Bath at Longleat to thank for that, because he was the first to open his home, and he was followed by the Dukes of Marlborough at Blenheim and the Dukes of Chatsworth, Dukes of Devonshire at Chatsworth, sorry. And that made a huge difference. But really in the press, there was a great deal of shock about this. It was said, peers have now become florists and caterers in order to maintain their homes. People couldn't believe it. And we talked in a magazine in the 1950s about Lord Salisbury at Hatfield House having to queue in an orderly line of tourists to manage to get a book from his own library. But if they hadn't done that, then we wouldn't have the model we have today of people saving these homes through bed and breakfast, wedding events, opening their gardens to the public, giving tours of their homes. And now I feel I've just taken it to the next logical stage, which is I'm not just sharing my home, I'm sharing our life within the home with an even greater audience. And that's been miraculous. It's absolutely saved Lalande. I'm sure it can save other chateaus as well.
And I think it also, it increases understanding and awareness about what it takes to preserve these extraordinary properties. It also makes them accessible. Not everybody has the capability of perhaps coming to stay or coming to visit, but it allows them to be a part of that, which I think is really important as well.
Absolutely, just as I will watch people on the other side of the world having a life that I could never have. It's this amazing exchange.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I think this past year has shown us all how important it is to find those connections. And there are so many people on the chat line, which we'll be sure to share with you, who have just thanked you for that, and thanked you for making them feel a part of it, and thank you for bringing them into your world, which has been especially meaningful this past year.
Well, it's been as life-changing for me, far more so than it has been for them. People say that it's helped them in lockdown, but it's transformed our lives here.
Yeah. I'm going to move over to some of the questions that have come in during our conversation. And I think one I'm particularly excited about is, so Rachel Jones would like to know, she's curious about what upcoming project for the Chateau are you most excited about completing?
Oh, it's so impossible to answer because there's so many good ones. At the moment, I'm on a real high about the paneling.
Yeah.
We all are. We were just awestruck as it was arriving. But the lake and the chapel have always been the things that I've been most excited about. But they're very long-running projects. They're going to take a long time. The lake specifically will be several years. But some shorter-term ones are the paneling and the room that I'm sitting in now, just getting my office finished. Things like that are great.
Yeah. And Jana Miranda asks, the view of the old tower shows the smaller window in the bathroom off of Chambre Perse, but I also see a ground level walled doorway below the winter salon. Am I seeing that correctly?
On that side, I haven't seen a doorway on that side. Well, now I want to have a look and see what something else, because we do not know all of the secrets of Lalande. That's absolutely certain. That window, we have asked the architect recently, she's putting in plans for us to reopen it to its original size. So the whole facade is going to go back to the way that it was. Yeah.
And another wonders, how do you, Sherry Dugan asks, how do you find the artisans to restore the chateau?
Well, that's actually quite difficult. We're lucky in the local area. There are excellent artisans. The people working on the terrace at the moment are specialists in restoring ancient buildings. They're very, very busy. So, for example, a great carpenter came recently and he is going to be doing paneling in one of the bedrooms, but he cannot start until October. So I'm very lucky as well because we have two strong sort of building firms that we work with and that people will know from watching the vlogs. And so they're here doing constant works. They tend to do things like restoring the outbuildings, the attics, those places. And then we get more specialist artisans to come and do the renovation works.
Another question is, and this is an interesting differentiation. Are you restoring or are you renovating?
We're doing both.
Do both.
Yeah, because the way I see it is restoration is taking something back to the way that it would have been rather than preservation, which is keeping it in the state and not allowing it to deteriorate. So to take it back to what it was, but I don't want to just take Lalande back to what it was. I do want plumbing and electrics and some modern comforts. This is a house that is very, very lucky because it's retained its original function of being a home. Many haven't been that lucky, and it's wonderful because it gives us museums, which is fantastic. But it is very nice that we're in a house that has been added to by every single generation, as I mentioned, with the Grand Salon. So that enables us to imagine doing a room with 18th century paneling, which will have a 16th century ceiling and 19th century furniture, for example. And that's the way we'll continue to restore this house. That's the philosophy here, because that's the soul, that eclecticism is the soul of Lalande.
Yeah. There's a very specific question from Loretta Dimmick. She says, I love watching the Château Diaries and only discovered it recently. Where did you find the gorgeous Venetian mirrors that she sees throughout the chateau?
I actually bought them in London. I wish I could say I'd gone to Venice and bought them there. I bought them in London a long time ago. I really love them too. Yeah, I love Venetian mirrors, anything Venetian really.
And then a question from Bertrand Preouf in French, who says, it's a beautiful metamorphosis thanks to your beautiful combination of love for the property, good taste, and good humor. They'll be in France in May. Do you accept last-minute appointments, last-minute visits?
Absolutely. If people contact the Chateau, then Natty deals with any requests, and I'm always happy to show people.
Great. And let's see, speaking of plumbing, I'd love to hear more because now we're all thinking about, my God, yes, who wouldn't want plumbing? Speaking of plumbing, I'd love to hear about the process of sneaking bathrooms and other modern comforts into the fabric of the building.
That is quite a difficult thing. It's something that each chateau owner tackles differently. I personally don't like it when I go to a house that were often the ones that were done sort of in the early 20th century, where they would literally just put a little wall, taking a corner of the room out and put a bathroom in that. Yeah. I'd rather lose the room next to it and have that as a bathroom, if there's the luxury of doing that, and where there isn't. Here, we've tried to solve it by putting tiny shower rooms. So we lose on the size of the bathroom, but into the thickness of the old walls. We were lucky because the previous family had put cupboards into that thickness. And so instead, we sort of made them slightly bigger and put tiny shower rooms. So we have managed to get a bathroom for almost every bedroom without losing the proportions, but it's not an easy thing to do.
I bet it's not. And here's a nice one, I think, almost for coming to the end. What are you doing to transcend negative thinking or getting into fear or concerns about the future, especially during these uncertain times?
I'm very optimistic. I wish I could say there was like something I think of, but yeah. I'm quite a naturally optimistic person. I think that even if there are hard times, this too shall pass. So we tend to say, let's face the music and dance.
That is a beautiful, beautiful thing to leave us on. If we don't have any other questions, I don't believe. So I will thank you, Stephanie, so much for sharing your passion, your vision, and it's an extraordinary project. And I think that there are many who look forward to coming to France when we're able to travel again, and especially to visiting properties like yours that have such love and have undergone such extraordinary work.
Well, I'm very excited to open our doors to everyone again. And thank you. It's been an absolute joy talking to you.
Yeah, and thank you very much.
What you do, really. Your society is helping so many places. It's really beautiful work.
Yeah, we're fortunate. We work with many wonderful properties, and as you've discovered, or you mentioned, in France, heritage and artisanry is really valued, and it makes it a pleasure to do the types of things that we're doing.
Yeah, it is a joy.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.